It is ripping.
Here we go. Another show, the Research to Reps Roundtable. I'm your co-host, Dr. Pat Ivy, and with me is Dr. Ted Lambrinides. How you doing, Ted?
I'm doing great, Pat.
All right, this is a good one. Dr. Ernie Reimer, what's going on?
You know, I thought I should just dress up for the occasion today. I have my Kung Fu clothes on. It's because we have Duncan French from the UFC here today. Duncan, how are you?
Doing good, guys. Nice to see you all. Honestly, Ernie, I wouldn't expect anything less, and you're presenting yourself well, like you're doing today. So, thank you for the effort.
Got to be ready for anything today.
For sure. I'm excited.
So,
thanks for being here.
Yeah, so sports performance specialist with UFC, vice president of performance at UFC Performance Institute, Dr. Duncan French. Can you tell our listeners and viewers a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Pat, and guys, for having me on. Obviously, I've always been aware of the podcast, and it's nice to get the invite. But yeah, I mean, listen, I'm doing my thing out here in Las Vegas right now as vice president of performance at the UFC Performance Institute. So we've actually just had our 5th birthday, our 5th anniversary. The inception of the PI was back in 2017. I was employee number 1 for that, and I've had the pleasure and liberty to build out the team and kind of create the operation systems that we've got going on right now, supporting our global roster of UFC fighters, which is about 650 right now. So it's been a trip. It's been a blast. We're supported by the UFC, which is a pretty dynamic company. We get a lot of freedom to kind of interrogate what we're doing and seek best practices. But yeah, that's my current position. Immediately before that, I was at the University of Notre Dame, heading up performance sciences and director of Olympic strength and conditioning at Notre Dame. And preceding that, I was back in the UK, primarily in the British Olympic system. I worked 3 Olympic cycles where I was heading up strength and conditioning for, GB boxing in the northeast of England, and then GB basketball through to the London Olympics, and then GB taekwondo team through to the Rio Olympics. A little hiatus in the English Premier League, working in soccer there for a period of time. So yeah, it's been a ride. I've been blessed.
Now, Duncan, with all those 600 plus athletes that are under your supervision, how many are on site at the different facilities, and how many do you have to help manage them virtually?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Ted. I mean, it's a pretty unique business model that we work to here at the PI. I would say it replicates kind of an Olympic training center more so, because it's quite a transient facility. We don't hold, the UFC doesn't have the rights to each of those athletes like you would, New York Yankees own the rights to their players, right? You can mandate and regulate a lot of activities around sports performance or structure and strategy, whereas our fighters are all independent contractors, and as I say, 650 as a ballpark number around the world. So they're engaging with us, in a variety of different ways. It's very custom and very bespoke. And the facility here in Las Vegas is quite transient. Guys come anywhere from, 2-3 days just to get some diagnostics and some evaluations, and then they can take that information back to their own gyms and work with their coaches on information that we've provided to them. The kind of average visit time is, 2 weeks, a week to 2 weeks, something like that, where they just come and do an intensive block of assessment or treatment or working with our experts, through to, guys doing 8-week fight camps with us, or getting 9 months of ACL, post-surgical support with our holistic program here. So it's a very kind of unique model that we work to. It's pretty, I want to say, chaotic in nature, but it's very diverse and disparate. There's not one size fits all. And it's kind of the mantra that we work to is individually coordinated, performance systems. And then, like I say, they're coming from all over the world. So it creates a unique cultural environment as well when you have, a bunch of Brazilians descend on Las Vegas, and how do they operate, and their mindset thinks when it comes to performance. And then, the Russians come in from Dagestan or wherever it may be. And then you've got, American clientele, or coming from Europe, or, Asia and China. So it's a melting pot of training philosophies and approaches, which we obviously try and put ourselves in the middle of and support the best we can.
Duncan, talk to me about where, like, a comparison of where your mindset was when you first started that opportunity and you're starting from scratch. What were you thinking about then compared to what you're thinking about now?
I mean, you guys have all been in, similar opportunities where you've walked into something and someone in the hierarchy has said to you kind of, all right, you're the person, you kind of set the agenda here. You let us know what we should be doing and what you believe is best practice and the correct way to go about it. And I think, that's a double-edged sword. That's what attracted me to the opportunity. But as you guys know, it's kind of daunting as well, right? It was the, don't F it up type scenario where you want to make sure that it's functional and operational and meets kind of where the rubber meets the road and you're meeting the athlete requirements. So I think what was attractive to me coming into this position was it was a blank page. MMA or mixed martial arts is really only 30 years old as a professional sport. So it's very different to football or baseball or soccer or rugby that have got these legacies of information and documentation and findings and insights. MMA is a pretty green sport when it comes to professionalism. And I think having that blank page and saying, all right, now draw upon all my kind of experiences as a practitioner at the coalface, working as a strength coach, working with different professionals, different organizations, saying, all right, what's my approach? What do I think is the best way to do that? That's been, like I say, pretty daunting, but also the most exciting part of it is being able to really align systems and structures of operation, which I've got my fingerprints on it and kind of my philosophy and my approaches. Now, I always say, the church is not the building, the church is the people. And we've got some great people here on our team that as individual practitioners and experts are fantastic, but just being part of building it and pulling the strings and playing puppet master a little bit has been, it's been really exciting. It's been great. I never forget when I first started the job, and this is more for Pat and Ted. So on day one, when I started the job, I walked into my office and there's this big package, like cardboard package on my desk. And so I opened up this package and I'm like, what the hell is this? I've just started this new job at the UFC. Anyway, inside like a full belt of ninja throwing stars. Okay, ninja throwing stars and a big target. No note or anything. I'm like, what the hell's this? I'm working in MMA, not like ninja training. And I'm asking around, hey, do you know where this is from? Nobody had any idea where it's coming from. I mean, 6 months maybe passed and we just passed it off. Okay, well, this has just arrived and we'll just forget about it. But here's some fun with throwing ninja stars down the hallway at the PI when there's nobody in town, and it's like, all right, the doors are shut. Let's play ninja. Let's play Bruce Lee. And I get this text message maybe 6 months later from Ernie saying, hey, did you get my gift? And I was like, wait, because I've forgotten about it by that time. Like, what are you talking about? Anyway, lo and behold, this set of ninja stars has come from Ernie Reimer to welcome me to the new job on day one. So that's kind of insight to Ernie. Hence, he's wearing his kung fu kit. I don't know why he's got a kung fu kit on because we don't wear kung fu kits in UFC. But he's making the effort, so that's appreciated.
Nice. I was wondering where this story was going, but I do remember that now. And, like, just talk to me about the diverse skill sets of these athletes. I mean, I'm 41 years old, 2 years into Kung Fu, purple sash, but talk to me about the skill sets of these athletes.
Yeah, I mean, listen, in my career, I've had, and I'm not blowing smoke, but I've had the privilege and pleasure of working with 37 different Olympic or professional sports in different settings. And just being around, working in NC2 institution and all the different sports you might have access to and support approaches to, it's fascinating seeing, number one, the culture of a sport. If you take baseball, just talk about culture in baseball and those athletes. If you look at a basketball team, it's a different approach, it's a different culture. And I think the skill of being a performance professional is, number one, being able to enter a culture and fit in and thrive within the culture of what that sport is. then you come to mixed martial arts, right? And it's just a decathlon of different styles and different fight cultures. Whilst it's a combat sport in itself, you know, jiu-jitsu culture is very different to kickboxing culture, is very different to freestyle wrestling culture, you know, so we've got this melting pot of all these different things in our sport, which is, it presents a fascinating performance challenge. Like the performance problems that we're solving with our athletes, every day is different because of the different stylistic backgrounds that they're coming with. We also talk about, you know, the three factors of you know, being we need fighters. We're working with fighters. We're working with martial artists. So, you know, you personally know that as a Kung Fu practitioner, you know, martial arts brings a certain amount of, you know, kudos and respect and an approach and a system. And then we're also dealing with athletes, right? So fighters, martial artists, and athletes all combined as a need into one, before you even get into, is this person a wrestler or are they a kickboxer? So, you know, just the disparate characteristics that are in this sport is what makes it fascinating. And like I say, in all of my years of working with different sports, there's no sport that I've ever had the pleasure of working with has got so many degrees of freedom within the sport that we have to try and consider as mixed martial arts. So, like I say, there's never a dull day. It makes it freaking hard to try and figure out the most appropriate training strategy or training science to adopt. But again, that's part of the joy of this environment in working with, you know, mixed martial artists.
Duncan, I found it when you were hired by the UFC, I had some questions. And so this question is 5 years old. So I apologize.
No, it's all good.
But I think it's really progressive that the UFC hired a director of sports science. When you look at a university or a professional organization hiring a sports science, the idea is that you're trying to train your athletes to be better than someone else's athletes. But UFC hired you to be so UFC competes with UFC, correct? Mm-hmm. So I find it fascinating that they thought it was important enough to hire a sports scientist to work with the athletes who are going to compete against one another. So what do you think was the idea, the philosophy behind the organization to say, we need a director of sports scientists?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you putting that in the back of your gray matter for the last 5 years, Pat. So thanks for the question. It's a great question, right? Because if you look at our mandate, we're a league. Like the UFC is a league, right? And we are mandated to support our global roster of athletes. Now we work, and it's a real problem that we're faced with. We might work with the guys that are competing against each other in the main event on Saturday evening. Okay. And we have to do the same standard of support for both of those people. We're agnostic to the whole roster. So it's an interesting philosophy because we'll only ever bat 500, right? We'll win and we'll lose for every single bout, which, you know, in your role, you know, driving performance for the institution, it's all right. We've got our own stuff to take care of, and we're trying to drive competitive advantage, you know, for the institution and our teams. And then, you know, that's kind of sacrosanct to what you're doing there. The reason why I think the UFC, you know, put so much emphasis on science, innovation, sports science is a few things. Number one, one of the mantras of the UFC is be first. All right. So, you know, one of our pillars of philosophy is be first. You know, it comes from the talk with Dana, and, you know, what the UFC is quite a, you know, it's a social disruptor as a sport. So being not confrontational, but being first in innovation and change and being at the forefront of things is what this organization is about. And when the concept of the Performance Institute came about, they wanted to position, you know, the UFC not only as leaders in mixed martial arts, but at the table with the NFL, with the NBA, with whoever, you know, these other leagues, so that the UFC is recognized as being at the forefront of insights, innovation, and understanding human performance and optimization of human potential. So to do that, you know, and again, kudos to the executives, you know, they see science, technology, innovation as central to where we're going, as you well know in your role, you know, how we use insights to make better decisions on the floor, in the weight room. But we've just got the nuance of, we have to do that in a very sacrosanct fashion, by which we're very closeted with our data and the information that we collect around an athlete to support that individual. We're going to do the best we can with both athletes up to the point in which the octagon door closes. And then when the competition starts, we're essentially like, hey guys, we just hope it's a great fight and people are excited by it. And when the octagon door opens again, the PI then wraps our services around you from the regeneration, the recovery piece as well. So it's a really unique kind of mindset for our staff to get into, because as you've rightly pointed out, most of the time you're like, all right, well, Sunday we need to win the football game, right? We're going on the field and we're beating the opponent. Whereas we go on a Saturday evening, it's like, we just hope it's a great fight and everyone's healthy and the fans are excited, which is just kind of a pivot from the normal approach to performance modeling, you know?
Yeah, but a question with regard to, you know, I know Bill Kramer talked about this several times when he looked at his research of American football and the impact of physical trauma. Mm-hmm. And so when you try to do a literature search on the physiological effects of physical trauma, which your sport's central to, how does that influence? Because there's, as we said, I don't know, you know, there might be some research that you've done that, how does that influence some of the recovery strategies?
Yeah, so I mean, Dr. K was my PhD advisor, so you know, there's a guy close to my heart. And again, we could throw this question to Pat as a former football player, because again, I think, you know, number one, I always say, fighters were world-class fighters before the Performance Institute came around, and long after we're gone, they'll still be doing world-class performances. I think combat sport is one of those sports where innovation is inherent to how these fighters figure out how to win. So, you know, listening and taking information and listening to the insights from the coaches and from the fighters is where we always start the conversation. So, like I say, I'll put it to Pat, like, how did you feel after a Sunday? And you know, after that car crash, it's a football game. Like, where's your head at? Where's your body at? Where's the emotions at? What's the energy levels? Like, you've got to start with just drawing insights from the individual that's going through it. And I think you're naive to not do that. And again, that's central. We try to be good listeners. And I think that's really important in the performance paradigm. But yeah, to then say, okay, well, where can our approaches, our methodologies take? Because, you know, we're reaching out to, you know, SEAL teams and special operators. There's a lot of synergy in what they do when they're trying to operate with, you know, calorie deprivation or sleep deprivation or dehydration. You know, that's kind of where our world sits. Obviously, it's combative training or combative operations. What's the attrition rate on the psychology of someone that's going into battle, you know, whether it's the battlefield or into the octagon, which is a little bit of a different environment, obviously, but still a lot of synergy. So, you know, we're trying to draw on our insights from our partners, our friends, our colleagues in military. We're looking to those, again, collision and combative sports like rugby union, like Australian rules football, like football. You know, I'm not taking too much insight from, you know, a golf psychologist to say, oh, what's the mindset of a guy that's trying to make a 12-foot putt versus the mindset of an athlete that needs to go into an octagon and go to war, go to battle with potentially, you know, survive or you're getting taken down. It's a completely different mindset. So we try to align with those insights that are out there from different partners. And of course, we're doing some of our own collection aggregation on the physical side of it, you know, the attrition rate around injuries, the mechanisms of injuries, the duration. And, you know, we've got a very thorough injury audit around competition and training. And the psychology of our sport, again, is pretty unique. So these are all fun tasks, fun items that we're taking on that we don't have a lot of clarity in those answers right now. But I think that's, again, what's unique about our position is we're turning over some rocks that have never been turned over before and finding out some pretty cool stuff, which we then obviously want to share, you know, to the community.
Ernie, as you are thinking about how this conversation is going and your background as a accomplished ninja star thrower, right? How would you like to, when you think about what Duncan, that mindset of taking yourself to the next level, what do you think about when it comes to UFC or combat fighting, and then maybe applying it to what you do every day? What are some comparisons you draw?
Well, I guess what I just heard Duncan say that stands out to me is just putting yourself in a really uncomfortable situation, because I think, it takes a different mindset to step into a dangerous situation willingly. And obviously, we don't step into dangerous situations every day, but to me, what it resonates with me is putting yourself in really uncomfortable situations to facilitate the opportunity to, grow as an individual, as a professional. What about you?
Yeah. I was just going to say, and again, throwing it back to you, I think, we've all heard that old adage of, you fall to the level of your training in competition. And I think in the world that I'm operating in right now, that's a very real kind of consideration, because tactically, due to the different styles and the different approaches of the fights, your opponent is going to take you to somewhere where you don't want to be, where you don't like being. So if I'm a stand-up striker or a kickboxer, obviously strategically, I'm going to try and take you to the floor and grapple and wrestle you down where you're not comfortable. Same thing, vice versa. I can stand up and strike, keep you a distance, and you're not going to be very comfortable. I think that's really central to the tactics and the approaches and how guys try to be successful and win in the fight. And I think what I would say to you guys is, like, how do you go about understanding sports like that, where the technical, tactical side of things can shift so monumentally in terms of the approach to winning, that when you try and build a performance strategy around it, what do you put your big rocks on? Like what are the big rocks in a pretty fluid environment like I have? I don't know if you've got examples that you can draw upon, because that's something that's very real to me on a day-to-day basis. Is we're trying to define the critical factors that determine success for any MMA fighter. But what really differentiates winning and losing is how you can tolerate being in some of those very uncomfortable situations where someone takes you into the deep water, and you still got to find out how you solve that problem, even though it might not necessarily be your area of expertise,
I think just in my background, playing football, you have the techniques and fundamentals and skills of playing the position that you're playing. So there's different points during the week, during practice, you need to be in certain situations. You need to practice some goal line. I play defensive line, you need to practice some goal line defense. You need to practice pass rush. You need to practice, using your hands. You need to practice knowing what the opponent's going to do that week. If they are a trap team, or if they're more of a spread option team, you need to be able to adapt and adjust. But you have to be put in those situations, as many as possible. You also have to be put in some situations that you haven't faced yet. So hopefully your coaches know how the team is vulnerable and how each player is vulnerable, and then they can throw some of those situations at you during practice, and then give you the knowledge you need to be able to overcome that situation. And I think it's vital that you have that you continue to work on your technique and fundamentals, but you are introduced to new situations. So the more situations you can learn and adapt to, the more you can learn and adapt to. So I think there needs to be some structure around what's the base, what's the fundamentals, the foundation, and then I guess building up, knowing what your strengths are, and then being able to protect your weaknesses.
Yeah, massively agree, Pat. And I think that's where we've put a lot of our efforts in the 5 years we've been around, is trying to understand what are those fundamental components, regardless of if you're a wrestler, a grappler, or a striker. These are fundamental to success in MMA, control time or octagon positioning or significant strikes. There's certain things which it doesn't matter what stylistic background you've got, you have to pursue these things. And on a physical side of it, we know that, glycolytic performance, the ability to tolerate, high levels of lactate is a differentiator between top 15 performers and everybody else on the roster, right? So we can go after some of these things, which are big rocks. Then we start to get into the kind of the conversation of, right, are we targeting your limitations to raise the lowest hanging fruit to a point of, survival, or, can you take something from below average to average and be happy that that's going to be enough? Or are we trying to take your strengths and make them super strengths, i.e. we're going to make your striking or support your striking training so much that what makes you a world-class practitioner? So we're always playing around with this balance in our programming of when do we target limitations, as you're talking about, like goal line defense, like when are we targeting something that we're not very good at? If we're playing against a spread offense on goal line, with our data, our gap analysis shows that we're not very good in those scenarios. Like, when are we focusing on limitations and weaknesses? But you can't get away from the fact that, we've got a great, operation against trap teams, and we've got to continue to really emphasize what we're good at. And I think that really resonates with me and what our team tried to do to support the fighters here, because of the nature of our sport and all these different styles that go into one sport. When you're doing the decathlon, you're only ever doing the pole vault, right? And then you're only ever doing the 110-meter hurdles, and then you're only ever doing the long jump. In MMA, it can change like that, and you're a pole vaulter straight into being an 800-meter runner, straight into being a 100-meter sprint, and it's like it's all meshed together. So you're on the ground, you're against the fence, you're standing up in the middle of octagon. It's pretty chaotic, and building training science against chaos is what our challenge that we're presented with.
When a situation arises where it could be injury or something else, where you have a big match coming up and one of the boxers or the fighters, you have to bring in a substitute, and you've got 2 weeks to 1 week's notice. Is there anything that you do from say a health and safety perspective that this person has to have a minimal, baseline fitness to be able to participate? Or do you have a pretty good idea where that fighter might be prior to them being on the substitute?
Yeah. It's a great question, because again, a very real life question, very real life scenario. You can pull someone up off injured reserve on a football team, and you've probably had some awareness of what their return to play strategy has been and where they've come from and where they've got to. And then you're making, a judgment call. This guy's 85% ready to go. We're comfortable with someone being 85% on the football field, right? And we don't always get that awareness or that clarity, because the shortest short notice fight that I've been around is probably about 10 days to 2 weeks. So someone getting called up 10 days before and then they're expected to fight. That's tough, because the other part of our sport is we're a weight classification sport. So there's kind of two fights for our guys. There's the fight to make the scales, and if they don't hit that weight, they're going to lose money. It's prize fighting, right? So they only get paid when they fight and compete. And then there's the fight itself. Are you in a physical, are you physically prepared for the rigors of 15 minutes, or really someone's going to go into a championship fight on 10 days notice, but 15 minutes or 25 minutes of grueling competition. So yeah, there's certain priorities that we would put around the health and safety piece. So we're not moving the needle on performance in 10 days. Let's be honest. We're all aware of that. There's very little we can do in changing someone's level of conditioning ready for a fight in 10 days. Our emphasis then really becomes on optimizing the experience to make weight. Like, what is what's their body composition, their energetics? What do we need to do to help them make weight in the easiest way possible, so the attrition of the weight cut is actually not further exacerbating the problem that they've only just come off 10 days notice going into a fight. You would hope that, there's a big 8-week fight camp culture in combat sport, but I talk about the 52-week fight camp. Like, there's money in combat sports now that these guys need to be professionals all year round. So if you have a fight and let your weight balloon up out of control and then get called up for a short notice fight, that's going to be super problematic, and you're potentially missing a payday. If you can control and regulate your walking weight or your off-camp weight, knowing that you're in a position to be reactive at any moment in time, if you do get the short notice call, be it 5 weeks, 3 weeks, 10 days, that you can actually make that jump down to your competition weight. That's where we would put our emphasis, Ted, in that kind of scenario. But we don't always get the clarity, as Pat's been talking about, of being on a team or being at an academic institution where where all your personnel, where all your athletes are at any moment in time. Sometimes they fall to us and it's like, okay, this guy's just been called up and he's from, Florida. We've never spoken to him, but here we go. Let's do what we can and just wrap him in anything that might support that approach to performance optimization within the limitations of what optimization could be in that scenario.
With the UFC, I'm not sure what kind of restrictions you have. If there's like in a lot of pro sport, you have the collective bargaining agreements and there's rules and regulations. In college sport, you have a lot of NCAA rules and regulations, and I'm sure you have anti-doping rules and stuff. But when you work in elite sport, you do have the opportunity to do some unique things that you may not be able to do, say, in college sport. Mm-hmm. And among those big rocks that you mentioned, you said like glycolytic capacity, probably even buffer capacity is included in that. But what are some of the novel strategies that we may be missing in some of our settings, like college athletics, that you guys may use to, say, improve GLUT4 transporter protein presence or glycolytic capacity, buffer capacity, some of these things that just we may be missing that you may be allowed to do or that you are implementing there from an innovative and translational standpoint?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Ernie. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, I'm a huge believer in adaptation-led programming, right? So from a philosophical approach with my team and with my people, we want to make programming strategies and programming decisions that are influencing physiology, biology, or cognition, right? So if it's not aligned to a clearly defined adaptation, it's a waste of time. All right. And we don't get a lot of time with our athletes to really just mess around and play about, right? People are expecting, efficiency of the training dosage in a cost return type scenario, right? We want to get as much bang for our buck. We get, we're blessed here in as much as we get some cool technology and some resources, which potentially, academic institutions might not have a lot of the access to. It means we can get a lot of insights around metabolic health, some of those key parameters around, biochemical profiling, because we're resourced to do that, right? We've got the technologies, or we've got the time, or we're working with, a individual athlete versus, I think at Notre Dame I had 860 athletes, so in the NC2A environment, and I'll lean on you guys more than that because my exposure to it was pretty limited. But it was a numbers game. It's like, okay, what are the key factors that I can give to the masses that's going to move the margins for everybody? Whereas here we can get down to much more granular level detail against those physiological adaptations of our programming. So, we're doing some really cool things around, creative nutrition stacks to mitigate and influence, head trauma and concussion. And we've done a lot of work, with Thorne. I know those guys, Pat, our partners here at the UFC PI as well, in creating kind of brain health stacks for a combative sport. We've been looking at instrumented mouthpieces where we can start looking at head impacts and trying to profile some head impact characteristics, because we can't really use GPS or, Stat Sport or Catapult. We wear very little clothing in competition. So how do we profile that? We're starting to look at some patch-based technology that's kind of coming from the military support. So we get the ability to be creative in that kind of way, rather than, all right, we're really looking at this protein metabolism at this particular stage, or this microbiome condition that is consequent to, feeding or caloric restriction in a weight cut. Like we're doing that, but it's not necessarily anything out of the ordinary. It's just we've got capabilities to dive deeper down the rabbit hole and get way more clear awareness of that on an individual N of 1 type level versus an N of 800 type level.
I have probably a more basic question. I'm fascinated by something here. I just want to know, what does your average day look like?
For me personally, or just
Yes.
at the Performance Institute? I mean, I think for me, and being in, I'm essentially a performance director, right? So my days are everything from talking up the chain to the executives, because again, big difference from collegiate sport is like that whole revenue conversation, and it's corporate America. We're a promotion and we're driving certain interactions, interfaces. So the conversation around asset management, our fighters are all assets, how and any student athlete is an asset, right? But they're just the financials around that are a little bit different. So I can do everything from talking up into exec about what the PI is doing around a particular main event and how we're ensuring that they're going to make the octagon in 2 weeks' time to ensure that revenue is not lost from a pay-per-view perspective, through to, a team meeting with my strength and conditioning coaches, coming up with a paradigm of, decision making from diagnostics through to exercise interventions, and how are we building out, those systems and strategies, through to spending time feeding back data with an athlete or on a call to a manager or a coach, and everything in between. And then we get the chance to do some cool little pieces of what I would call applied sports science, where we're actually on the ground playing around, doing, taking some time out to just do some innovation pieces. Like what we're looking at, Sweet Sweat right now, which is kind of like a topical cream, which has got thermoregulatory properties to it. And that's obviously relevant to us because guys need to sweat to make weight. And what does that mean? How effective is it? And that type of stuff. So again, our sports science is to inform our practice. It's valuable activities to try and make us have better decision opportunities. So it's very diverse. It's exciting, and there's times when I'm spinning plates, I'm like, holy crap, this is just chaos. I don't know what's going on. I don't know my head from my asshole. But other times, like, actually the diversity of what we're doing is like super interesting, and I get the opportunity to do some pretty cool stuff with some pretty cool people, and from a personal values perspective, that's a big thing for me. Like, excuse my French, but I want to do cool shit with cool people. That's why I got into sport and sports performance. And I'm in an environment right now that allows me to do that. And that keeps me motivated and happy and excited,
Really cool.
Well, you mentioned applied sports science, and, when I look back, I don't know, I'm not sure exactly when you were at Notre Dame, but when I was coming, recreating myself and retiring from strength conditioning, moving into a career in sports science, you were obviously a performance science director at Notre Dame, and you were one of the first. But now fast forward, and I mean, you didn't just write the book, but you edited the book on sports science. And when I hear a lot of what you're talking about, a lot of moving parts. I mean, you can use the metaphor for a fighter, and that it's just chaos, and they have to be able to perform with under any different circumstance that they can face. And when I was hearing that, I was like, that's kind of like being a general applied sports scientist. But would you just talk a little bit about like the process of this textbook in relationship to the CPSS, and how you think it may actually impact the industry?
I'm a British guy, right? So I'm very blunt at times, but I'll be totally transparent, and I'll tell you how I feel. So if I get hung out to dry on this response and this answer, it's not my intention. But it's kind of the way I see the world, right? I'm in a privileged position because I'm British by birth. All right. So I've come up through an English and a British educational system and understanding what sports performance is for British in Britain. And then I've now got a career, which I love, in the United States. And I've been around, collegiate sport and professional sport in the States. I've had the pleasure of traveling to Australia and different parts of Europe, et cetera, et cetera. So the reason why I say that is, for me, sports science or sports performance, we've arrived at performance from two very different directions. Okay. If I look at, and I might be wrong, that's what I'm saying, people might hang me out to dry for this, right? But this is the way I see life. From the United States, performance has, so you got to look at the amount of talent that you have in the size of your country. Okay. Number one. Then you look at American sports, and usually they're large team sports with lots of personnel, whether it's baseball, whether it's hockey, whether it's football, obviously. And then military has been a big driver in how physical training has come about within America. So for me, the coach, the sports performance coach in America has been about the management of numbers and capacity and getting large entities through a performance strategy where there's still a large talent pool. If I take the European system or the Australian system, way smaller numbers of talent, right? Smaller countries. So we have to wrap our talent in cotton wool a little bit more and make sure that that talent is the talent that gets to the top of the tree, because there's nobody else, right? We just don't have the same amount of people. So in being a little bit more strategic and adopting scientific principles, because we probably had, sports science as a degree at universities in the UK and in Europe earlier than kind of the US. We've arrived at performance in two very different mindsets. Okay. Now, neither is incorrect. I think we need a little bit of both. We need coaches that are good at managing systems and can drive and motivate and coach the ass out of something. And then we also need a little bit of scientific approach and potentially some data and some insights to adopt an understanding of regression and progression. Okay. So that's kind of how I see the world. So to answer your question, I think the US system hasn't historically been around a conversation of scientific principles and scientific values to understand the world of sports performance. Whereas that's my MO. That's kind of where I come from, right? So when the NSCA was looking at where, new employment is happening, Pat's hiring yourself, and now we're getting sports scientists in collegiate programs. We're getting sports scientists in professional organizations. Like, that's a growing industry, which is becoming a little bit vogue and a little bit of a trend in the United States. But there's no governing body. There's no body to support that in the United States. Whereas you go to Australia, you go to the UK, they have discrete professional organizations for that specific thing, exercise physiology or sports scientists. So the NSCA saw an opportunity to say, well, we need to kind of govern the narrative a little bit here and advance the insights of the industry and potentially pull strength and conditioning coaches in America along the way to elevate just the awareness of where this kind of pendulum swings from, coaching and the real kind of American system of rigorous strength and conditioning through to like a pretty unique scientific tailored approach in Europe and Australia, and find that happy medium. So, I was approached, and I was blessed to be given the opportunity to take the lead with Lorena Torres, who's Spanish. So here you go. We've got a British guy and a Spanish lady who are the editors for an American Strength and Conditioning Association to edit the book on sports science. I don't think that's a coincidence that that's come about that way. And then I obviously brought a lot of American and international contributors to the book, but hopefully people see value in it. But I think, to finish off, like I say, it's not about the book and what is the Bible of sports science right now, hopefully a seminal text in sports science. It's about looking at our industry, the four of us here, and saying, okay, where can we all continue to progress for the greater good of our athletes that sit at the center of this conversation, be they collegiate, be they professional, be they Joe Blow on a weekend who just wants to get out and have a run around. Like, how are we supporting them the best we can? Because as humble servants within a performance system, that's our mandate, right? So what's all the different tools and techniques that we can use? And if we're blind to some of those, then we're doing them a disservice. And that's kind of how I see the world. I'll get down off my soapbox right now. Okay.
I don't really think you're going to like have any blowback for those comments. I think those are appropriate.
Yeah.
Often what I like to say is that like our American system is really good at identifying talent and then acquiring that in some way. That's really big business. In college athletics, recruiting's everything. How many times have you heard a college coach say that? And then in professional sport, they have massive teams dedicated to athlete acquisition, player acquisition. So go identify and then find and get the talent. And I think the spirit of sports science is doing more and with the talent you have. So I'm just curious to know, like, when is someone going to emerge where they're good at both, finding the talent and doing more with the talent they have?
I mean, that's hopefully kind of the the North Star of where we're all trying to get to, right? And I think, your case in point, Ernie, you moved from being a strength coach and now your emphasis is potentially on a little bit more on performance science and sports science, and the way you look at the world has just pivoted a little bit. You could go back into the gym tomorrow and be a strength coach and know that you could thrive and survive. And hopefully I could potentially do the same thing. We're all looking at we should be all reflecting and looking at the weaknesses in our own skill sets and saying, okay, here's an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the scientific application of whatever it may be. Here's where I need to maybe use some more data insights to inform my practice. But over here, I know that if I want someone to get strong, my experience tells me I know exactly how to do that and the different facets and components of a program that need to be implemented. The other thing, which obviously is the white elephant in the room, is that the advancement of technology is something that none of us can hide from. And in the world of strength and conditioning and sports performance, like even more so. So I challenge everyone listening to this podcast to say, the sports scientist is not the technology guy. The sports scientist is not the GPS guy. Sports scientist can be the strength coach that takes a Tendo or a GymAware and starts to look at velocity-based loading of how to write better programs, because that's scientific methodology where you're trying to take insights and information to inform your theories or your hypothesis of how am I going to get this individual faster, more powerful, stronger, and you're adopting just strategic methodology. So we're all sports scientists, so we should be trying to think like that rather than putting someone in a box and saying, right, Ernie, you no longer can be on the floor because now you're a sports scientist. Pat, you got to stay in the weight room, bro. Like, let Ernie do all the data crunching. Of course, it kind of happens like that, but it's more of a mindset. Like it's not a organizational chart where here's a strength coach, here's a sports scientist, here's a dietitian. Like it's a mindset of how are we going to go through the evaluation, the interrogation, and then the strategy to move the needle on sports performance. And that's what I like. That's why it fascinates me, because part of me is really comfortable just building rapport and being a great coach on the floor and having fun in the trenches and getting after it and knowing that hard work is always going to be at the center of success. But the other half of me is like, actually, like doing this in a thought-provoking and strategic way is like actually a really creative way to support what I'm doing on the other side of the fence. And I think that's kind of where my mind sits.
I know I'm appreciative of, and we all are, of the contributions you've made to sports science and to the field, the field of performance. We've had so many conversations about why is sports science sort of the last department to the table. Mm-hmm. Why do you go to many athletic departments or professional organizations, and you have the nutritionist, you have the strength coach, you have the athletic trainer, and hopefully we get more mental health and performance people at the table as well. But the basis of all of those is science, and this is all in sport. But people that the conversations I have with leaders in sport is, well, what does a sports scientist do? Like, well, you already have them. You already have the basis of all of those areas is science. But who is actually looking at the study of the sport? Who is actually studying the sport? Who is actually taking the data that is being collected and determining what to do with it? Who is actually driving the decisions from the data being collected? And why is the professionals that and that's why I think the certification is so valuable, because that's how we will recognize our sports scientists better in the United States. So I'm trying to formulate a question from all of these words that I'm saying. I'm happy where we're going. We still have a little ways to go, but it's up to people like us to keep driving and pushing so that there's better understanding.
Absolutely, Pat, and I couldn't agree more. And you know, listen, there are lots of very good American sports scientists now, like very good, like starting to, you know, not starting, but like world leading. And you know, Ernie is doing, you know, leading at the cutting edge of that from a movement in America, which again, kudos to him. So it's something which the needle is absolutely shifting. You know, it's Adam Virgil or other people, you know, Ben Peterson, etc. You know, the list goes on, right? There's lots of people out there that are doing great sports science work. I think it might have been a rhetorical question, right? But I think in response to what you're saying, when I look at sport, there's a lot of dogma in sport, right? That if we could just take the world of strength and conditioning and say, all right, let's sit for the next 5 minutes and just talk about, we don't necessarily need to do this, but like those things that are very dogmatic in the world of strength and conditioning that don't really change, or that people are theoretically attached to, that we know are hard narratives to shift. You know, it's, you know, Mike Boyle talked about, you know, death of the bilateral squat and started to put some information alongside of it, and the whole world went like shit, like flat earth type stuff. What's going on here? You know, so that there's things that are just dogmatic in terms of, if you're going to do this, this is what you need to do, and it's not always supported by, you know, good solid evidence and rationale. So I think the world of sport, in every sport, there are pieces of dogma that we still battle with every single day. So that's the first thing I would say. And then, so why is sports science last to the table? Well, because there's a comfort with dogma, right? There's a comfort in tradition. There's a comfort in, this is how we do it. This is how we know we've done it historically, and therefore we have this incestuous educational system where athletes learn from coaches, athletes become coaches, and the story and the narrative continues, right? We've got to break that cycle somewhere. So I think dogma plays a large part in it. And then let's be honest, you know, like numbers and technology can be daunting, and not everybody is excited by trying to find information that is valid and rigorously interrogatable because of numbers and information, or how we're capturing it through whatever type of technology you're using. It's like, okay, it's actually quite kind of cool just talking to a human being and saying, get under that bar and let's go. All right, that's and I'm not saying that's not part of it, but I guess I'm just trying to rationale, you know, what you were saying in terms of, I think dogma stops us wanting to really question hard felt beliefs. And there's a intimidation between what if I'm wrong? Like, what if there's a better way? I'm not sure everyone wants to go there. And then there's also the piece of science is data and boring and in a dark room in front of a computer crunching spreadsheets, when, you know, it's not always that, right? So I don't know if that answers the question, Pat, but that's kind of where my mind's at.
So, speaking of where your mind's at and mindset, I mean, I feel like that's almost a theme, is this idea of challenging the status quo or being in uncomfortable situations. I think a big part of overcoming that or challenging the status quo is just being comfortable not knowing what the answer is. Mm-hmm. I think that ultimately that's like the quest of science, is to find the answer. A lot of people mistake the sports scientists as those who have all the answers. But you've mentioned this idea of like, wanting to be first, and you've talked mindset and innovation a lot. So maybe just briefly, could you define innovation, what that means to you and your organization, and what kind of mindset your performance team and your organization need in order to facilitate innovation?
Yeah. So I'll answer the second part of that first. Mindset of the team. When I recruit or hire anybody, one of the biggest components of my desire to get the right people is a problem-solving mindset. Like, we need problem solvers. People are inquisitive and want to find solutions to the host of performance problems that are out there. Okay, and that's an awareness of what's the outcome that you're trying to get to. Do we have clarity in the outcome? And then, like, multiply that by the creativity or the number of solutions that you can find to get to that end point. So problem solving exercises or a problem solving mind, I think, goes alongside EQ in the hiring process. You know, and again, it's very pertinent to the way I look at good team members, is people that are going to look at performance problems and try and find those solutions. What is innovation? For me, innovation is looking at things that everyone else has looked at previously, but finding a different perspective or a different way of looking at it. And I think that's the world of sports performance. Like, the wheel has been invented. Like, that people are winning world championships. People, you know, we know that times in you know, Olympic competitions are getting closer and closer and closer. So the margins of success or the differences across history are slowing. You know, they're essentially getting less and less and less. So, you know, it's not that we don't know how to get someone strong. It's not that we don't know how to make someone run fast. It's not that we don't know how to potentially prevent, you know, brain trauma with collisions. But it's like, how can we look at those things? And again, coming back to the theme of dogma, but start to look at it from a different perspective. And that's where I think you find innovation in the world of sports performance.
Duncan, aside from you know, the text that you co-authored, what are some other books or you know, that you would recommend to our listeners?
Well, I mean, I mean, right now I'm a big fan of this book. All right, Peak by Mark Dubs. All right, this, you know, and he's written that for over 40-year-olds, which is pertinent to me right now. But again, I love this book. There's a lot of philosophical alignment in that. So I try and look at thought leaders in terms of, you know, organizational and strategic philosophy. Daniel Bove's written, you know, a nice book recently. He's with the Pelicans, obviously, on, you know, the quadrant system, if I can find it. You know, again, looking at different books where, you know, systematic approaches that are driven by rationale. That's where I get excited, where someone has come up with a philosophy and an approach that is potentially grounded by good rationale and philosophy, and then I can get into it. So, you know, they're just two books that spring off my mind, off the top of my head right now, because they're pretty current and novel. But I go everything from, you know, leadership books and you know, through to, all right, hard science and what are we doing in terms of modifying the endocrine system in training loads. You know, so it's those are two that I'll just put out there. But you know, this is a great book just in terms of looking at a variety of different approaches to optimizing human performance, which you know, I've got a lot of time for Mark Bubbs.
Dr. Duncan French, it's been a pleasure having you with us. Where can our listeners and viewers find you, whether it's social media, or how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, no, thanks, guys. I mean, it's gone fast, right? But I've loved it, and hopefully I've not dominated the airways too much. But I've appreciated the chance to chat and share and just listen to you guys. But yeah, Pat, I'm on most social channels, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Twitter or Instagram. I'm just Dr._Duncan_French in most scenarios. And again, I'm happy to interact with anyone that reaches out and wants to get into, you know, discussions around combat sport, you know, UFC, MMA, or anything related to sports science. I'll do my best to answer where I can.
I think we need to take a research to reps trip out to Vegas and check out your facility.
You are welcome anytime. Again, I'm a bit biased, but I think we've got a nice spot. It's not a bad place to come to work and get, it's inspiring. And every day's a playground here, which is great. And we've got a clientele, an athlete clientele that their thirst for training is beyond many. So that helps the narrative as well. But yeah, you're always welcome. Doors are open.
We appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Ernie. You all have a good night. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.